I always like to be able to share some good news with you when I have it. And so last week, if you happen to miss, the big news, the great news was that here very shortly, probably within the next 40, 50 days, we're actually going to see ground being broken on our new expansion. So we're excited about that. Finally, we have reached that juncture in this whole process, and still a lot for us to do and a lot to be praying about. We're in talks with, communications with several different lending organizations about financing, so we're trying to work those details out. But our contractor said that in the meantime, they would be able to do a little bit of behind-the-scene work, but also come out and start doing some preliminary grading and things like that. So I would say at least probably by mid-August, I would think, we would be seeing some things going on here, and so we're going to try to keep you updated on what's happening. But just want you to continue to pray for our church, pray for that project. Also pray about how you're going to be involved physically, financially, everything. Just to show your support of your church. This is, like I said, this is your project. It's not just ours. It's not mine. It's all of our project, and this is our church, and so I just challenge everybody to be fully invested in it in every way that they can. The other piece of good news is Dylan talked a minute ago about just how God was speaking to him this week over the passage that we preached on last week about the parable of the lost sheep. And the amazing thing is, if you happen to miss last week, but if you were here, you know this, we had 2 people in this service last week give their life to Christ. So that's even better than the building, so we need to celebrate that. So just glad to be a part of New Life, and I think every single day, every single Sunday, we ought to get up and just thank God that we're part of a church that is doing something, that is seeing God work, that's growing. I mean, even in the summer, when people go, to and from the beach and wherever they take vacations, we always see a lot of new faces during the summer. And sometimes I joke around about that, and I say, well, that's people who were at another church, and they told their pastor they going to the beach that they really came here, But that happens sometimes. But if you're a guest here this morning, we're just super excited that you're here, and hope that maybe New Life is the place for you. If it is, let us know, and we'll tell you how to get plugged in. But we're in the beginnings of a brand new series. Of course, it goes right along with our Kids Jam theme about how Jesus rescues, and so we're going to continue over the next several weeks talking about different scenarios in which Jesus rescues. And now, before I get too far into it today, just want to see a show of hands, and there is an expected participation here that I think I'm going to see because it was this way in the first service. But by a show of hands, how many of you worry? All right, that's about like first service, everybody. We all tend to get a little anxious about things every now and again, and we give ourselves over to occasional worry. It might be because we're stressing over some health issues, some financial issues. There might be some things going on at home or in our family or at work that tends to give us a little bit of worry and anxiety, and it seems somewhat natural to at least express a reasonable amount of concern, especially over things that we have some control over. Now, even that, and I don't think that's, totally like off in left field, but even that we got to be careful of, because that can itself be a little slippery slope. We can find ourselves, becoming distracted, or even worse, being controlled by worry, by fears, by anxiety, perhaps even over things that we have no control over. We have no ability to change whatsoever. And I think that's why we find in Scripture several warnings about allowing worry to set itself up and, root itself into our life. Paul, he wrote the Philippian believers in chapter 4, Philippians verse 6. And listen to what he said. He said, don't be anxious about anything. Now, you might be tempted to say, well, that's easy for you to say. I mean, what was going on in your life? I mean, it's easy to say don't be anxious or worrisome, but I think Paul had a lot to be concerned about. If you read all that he went through and all that he experienced in his life, there are a lot of issues. But still yet, he says, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So bring those worries to God. Jesus said something similar in Matthew chapter 6. This is right in the middle of what's called the Sermon on the Mount, probably his most famous, well-known message that he ever preached, that we have record of anyway. And now this is a paraphrase, but he says, don't worry about anything. Don't worry about life. Don't worry about what you're going to eat. Don't worry about clothing. Don't worry about where you're going to live. Don't worry about what you're going to do tomorrow or in the future, because worrying about it isn't going to change anything. And if you look and sort of do a little word study, what you find is that in every case throughout the New Testament where the word worry, anxious, or anxiety is mentioned, it's always the same Greek word that is used in the original text, which talks about somebody who is overly concerned. Somebody who is being weighed down, or as if they're being pulled apart by worry. And it could be over something really small, or it could be, a pretty major issue. But being overly concerned, being drugged down, weighed down, or pulled apart. I grew up in church with this one girl. We were about the same age. And I would say that she was probably the closest thing that I've ever had to a sister. Our families were really close. We were going on, vacations together. We hung out on the weekends together. So she was my age, and her younger brother was pretty much the same age as my younger brother. So a lot of similarities in our family, and we just did a lot of things together. But I remember this one time I overheard her parents talking to mine about their concerns of her perhaps being anxious and dealing with some anxiety. And they were talking about how they were noticing, whether it was at school or at home, when she would begin to get anxious or nervous about something, she would sit and pluck her eyebrows, pull them out. And I thought, I had never really noticed that. And so I just began to watch. And sure enough, if she got by herself, maybe she was sitting, it could have been at home or at church or wherever, if she got to sit by herself, it would be as if she would go somewhere in her mind. And I don't know what she was dealing with. I don't know what she was thinking about or what was going on in her life at the time. But it was as if mentally she would just drift away, and it wouldn't take but just a minute, and she'd start pulling at her eyebrows. And she did that so much that at one point she didn't have any. She'd pull out every one of her eyebrows. And that seemed to be one of the signs to her being really anxious and nervous, worrisome about certain things. And I look back now and think that perhaps that was an early sign of something that would be a much bigger deal later in life. Because you see, unfortunately, she died when she was 35. And it stemmed from complications from drug and alcohol abuse. It's almost as if that was the early sign in her teenage, middle school, high school years that she couldn't handle. She didn't know how to deal with the stress and the worries of life. And that one mechanism to try to cope evolved in, or say, devolved into something much, much worse that pretty much cost her life. So it's no wonder why the Bible warns us so frequently about the dangers of worry and how detrimental it can be to our life, mentally, emotionally, and even physically. But the good news is, and with Jesus there's always good news. Good news is He comes to the rescue. And so that's what we're talking about here, not just last week or this week, but in the next several weeks to come. Jesus is always here to rescue us from those things that potentially can harm us. We talked about how He rescues the lost, and He's willing to go to whatever extremes it may take to find that one and bring them home safely. And so today, in the same line, we're going to talk about how Jesus rescues the worry. And we're going to go to Luke chapter 10, where He encourages this lady, her name's Martha, who seems to be overwhelmed with worry and anxiety. So let's look at Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 38, and read this story together. It says, "As Jesus and His disciples were on their way, He came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to Him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what He said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to Him and asked, 'Lord, don't You care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me.' 'Martha, Martha,' the Lord answered, 'you're worried and upset about many things. But few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her.'" So I just want us to try to picture in our minds what's going on here. This scene. Just walk through it. Jesus is invited to be the guest in a home. Two sisters, Mary and Martha. Now we can assume that this is the same Mary and Martha whom Jesus raises their brother from the dead, Lazarus, in John chapter 11. But they invite Him to be their guest in their home. He would have likely been reclining around a table, and in this culture, the tables would likely have been low to the floor. Wouldn't have been chairs or stools or anything really to sit at, just some cushions. And so they would have sat and reclined on these cushions around the table, and there's probably some good food there, and they're just enjoying each other's company and having some casual conversation. Everybody's just sort of laid back and relaxing. And this talking between Jesus, His disciples, and other guests is just going back and forth. And mixed in with that, He's doing some teaching. It's nothing formal. Just any time He can make a comment or make a point or teach a certain lesson, He'll do it and throw a word in here or there. And so Mary, she's found herself at Jesus' feet. And she's sitting there with the rest of the guests and Jesus. She's listening to everything He has to say. In the meantime, her sister Martha's frantic. And she's running back and forth from the table to the kitchen. She's cooking, she's cleaning, she's refilling drinks and making sure that everything is just so until it just boils over. She can't take anymore. And she goes to Jesus and she asks, "Don't You care that I've been left to do all the work while my sister just sits here? Tell her to get up. I need some help." Jesus, in His response to her, does what He always does. He speaks to the heart of the matter. He goes below the surface and speaks to the real issue. And He says, "Martha," He said, "you're worried. There's more going on here than what meets the eye. This is not about your sister. You're worried and you're upset about many things. This just happens to be the one thing that has brought it all to light. So you're worried and you're upset about many things. Martha, you're letting too many things weigh you down and pull you apart. When really, there's only one thing that's important right now. And your sister has chosen that, and I'm not taking that away from her. That wouldn't be right. That's not fair to her." Now, I have to imagine that must have felt like a dagger to her heart. To hear Him say those words, because she knows it's true. She knows what He's saying is right. But we're not told how she responded. I like to think that perhaps she dropped her towel. She let the dishes pile up. She says, "All right, guys, if your drink gets low, you're going to go get it yourself." And maybe she took her place there beside her sister. she sat at Jesus' feet and she listened for a while. I don't know. I hope that's the case, but we're not told. What we do know from this story is what it teaches us about worry, what it teaches us about how worry can grow out of control and to a place where it can grow to control us. And so what I want to do is just take a few minutes and point out some of the signs, some of the indicators that worry, that fear, that anxiety is beginning to get out of control. It's beginning to take root and bury itself in our heart. All right, so these are some warning signs. And one of them, just like Mary, is that we can begin to notice and sort of see the sign that worry is becoming an issue when we become easily distracted. Write that down if you're going to take notes with me. When we get distracted. It said that in verse 40. Martha, this is where her frustration, where her battle with anxiety really begins. Her sister is sitting at the feet of Jesus. She's relaxed. She doesn't have a care in the world. She's listening to what he has to say. But Martha, it says, Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. The word distracted there in the Greek is perispao. And it means to be drawn around or to be drawn away from. And it's talking about somebody, again, who's overly concerned, who's overoccupied, who's too busy to focus on one thing or what's really important. It's almost as if Martha is being led around on a leash by all of these concerns and all of these worries. Now, I can totally relate to that. I was telling you last week how we recently put our house up for sale. You know, you got 2 young girls, and they're growing up, and as they grow, they get more and more and more stuff, and you have to store it. So that's sort of the situation we're in, and we decided, hey, well, let's sell and let's build somewhere else. And so we did that several weeks ago. Now, I just want you to know, and this is, brag on my wife a little bit, Jessica always keeps an immaculate house. All right, I love that about her. Everything's always in order. It's clean. We've had people come into our house, even when it's dirty by our standards, and like, man, this place is spotless. That's just the kind of housekeeper she is. And she's the one who keeps it in order. Most of the time, I tend to things outside. That's just the way it works for us. If you've gone by my house, you know that I try my best to keep a nice-looking lawn, except for in the middle of July when you had no rain. So I'm struggling right now. So we put our house up on the market, and we knew that there was nothing about our house. We've been there 15 years. Nothing about our house that needed major repair. All right? We've always worked to maintain it, at the highest standard, right? But there were a lot of little things. When you start going around and you look through the eyes of somebody who's never walked in and maybe they're looking for something that might be out of place or wrong, and so it's like there's a nick in the wall here, there's a piece of molding here that might be loose, just stuff like that. A lot of little things that we thought needed to be fixed so that it would be perfect for any potential buyer. Here's the problem. There was plenty of time to do this, to go down the punch list and get everything just right, except for the fact that we decided to put our house on the market 2 days before we went on a 10-day vacation. So everything that could have been done at a normal pace, a stress-free pace, had to be done in 2 days. Because we knew, well, the house is going to be shown while we're gone, and we don't want anything out of order. We want it to be just right. And so I felt like this. I felt like I was being drawn around, driven and run around mentally, physically, over all of the things that we felt had to be done. And we had to get it done in 2 days. What shouldn't have been a stressor became a pretty big one. Because we got distracted, and when we get distracted, well, unfortunately, just like we see in Martha's life here, when we get distracted, we become sort of driven around by these worries and all the things that we think need to get done, well, we lose sight of what's really important and what really matters. So, I mean, we keep a fairly fast-paced life anyway, and so being able to take vacation and to relax is really important for us. And what I should have been focused on was letting go, right? Just hit and chill for a little bit, not frantically running around trying to complete a list of things to do and then go on vacation wondering if I got it all done, and is the house going to sell? Is it going to be just right? Are we going to make the right amount of profit? And all those things. Easily distracted. And see, that's where Martha was. She became worried about all the things that needed to be done that in her mind, perhaps they wouldn't get done. And if they didn't get done, what's Jesus going to think? Maybe he's going to be disappointed in her. You invited me to your house, and it's this way. You're not prepared. Everything's not in order. This is the most important person that has ever stepped foot in her house. And in her eyes, she looks around and she's like, it's a mess. This is chaos. There's so many things that need to be done, that should have been done, that aren't done. And there's my sister. She's sitting over there doing nothing. Jesus may not ever want to come back here again. He says, you're distracted over all the things that you think have to be done. Distraction is one of those signs that perhaps worry is beginning to take root in our hearts and minds. Another thing that signals an issue with worry is when we become doubtful. Doubt and uncertainty is at the core of Martha's question. When she's seen and had enough of this entire situation, she goes to Jesus and she says, don't you care? Now, I want to point out something interesting here. She prefaced her question with an address. She says, Lord, don't you care? You see, those two things don't line up. That causes an issue. Because if He is Lord, then He most definitely cares. But I don't know about you, but I've struggled with that too. And I've on occasion said those very same things, those same words. When the to-do list begins to pile up, the frustrations, the failures, the expectations, when all of that begins to weigh on me, I've found myself thinking, Lord, don't you care? Lord, don't you see what's going on in my life? Lord, can't you do something about this to change this situation? And see, when we entertain doubt, when we entertain uncertainty about our Lord and His concern for what's best for us and for our life, well, inevitably, worry, fear, insecurity is going to begin to tighten its grip on our hearts and on our minds. Because listen, if God doesn't care, who in the world does? See, that's a scary thought. We get there sometimes when we allow worry to begin to deepen its roots. Another example here in Mary's story is that worry is becoming a problem in our life when we're often disgruntled, when we're easily agitated, when we're irritable with other people. You can hear this in her tone. It's in the way she asks Jesus her question. This is not curiosity. This is straight up frustration. She's sarcastic. She's scornful. Don't you care? You of all people, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? She's ticked. She's had it up to here because she's thinking, how else is all of this work going to get done unless she gets up off her tail and helps me? I'm here doing everything myself. And perhaps you know somebody who gets like this sometimes, a little irritated, a little frustrated, a little disgruntled with other people who don't seem to be carrying their share of the load. Maybe it's somebody with, the same first and last name as you, right? Who just so happens to live at the same address, has identical kids, married to the same spouse, right? We all get this way. We get a little angry, we get a little frustrated. It might be with somebody at home, the kids or our spouse. It might be with somebody at work or other people that we volunteer with, whether it's at church or some other organization, because we look around and we see that there's so much that needs to be done. It needs to be done in a certain amount of time or by a certain date or in a certain way, and there's plenty of people to do the work, but nobody else seems to be doing it except us. Nobody else is carrying as much of the load as we perceive ourselves to be carrying. And so that comes out in anger, frustration, irritability, and it's a sign that we're becoming a little overly concerned. We're being pulled apart by too many things. It's a sign of worry and anxiety. We're worried that the task won't get completed. We're worried that, maybe it won't get completed by a certain time, or it's going to take up time that we had allocated for something else, or if it gets done, it won't get done to a certain standard. I mean, the list of examples of things that really weigh us down could just go on and on and on. The point is, just like with Martha, when we become distracted, we become doubtful, we become disgruntled, all of these are indicators. Like what Jesus said, we're worried, we're concerned, we're upset about too many things, when only one thing really matters. The last one here that I want to point out before I go to some remedies for this is that Martha shows us that when we become demanding, that too can be a real good indicator that something's going on, that there's a deeper problem. It goes hand in hand with being disgruntled. It's usually how we express our frustration with other people that we perceive not to be doing what they need to do. It's how we express our disapproval. We become demanding. You do this and you need to do that. And so Martha, she goes to Jesus. And now just imagine how upset you have to be to go to your Lord and demand that He do something. Right? She demands of Him. She says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Tell her, help me. She's at her wit's end. She don't know what else to do. This, in my eyes, is her attempt to regain control of a situation that she feels is out of control. Worse than that, this is her attempt to control somebody else, her sister. I mean, what better way to accomplish both of those things than to invoke the authority of God, right? All right, I've had enough. Jesus, a.k.a. God, tell my sister to do something different. Tell my sister to do what I think she should be doing to help me, right? Tell her she's wrong. Tell Mary that her priorities should line up with my priorities. Okay? You go do that. Now, I don't know about you, but that hits sort of close to home. That strikes a nerve. Not only because I've done it, but because I see it and I hear it all the time. Pastor, I'm so fed up with my spouse, the way he or she is acting and what they're doing. It's so obvious, it's apparently wrong. They need to get their act together. My children, whoever it might be that we're frustrated with, that we're disgruntled with, that we disapprove of. I've said it till I'm blue in the face. And, I've even been praying, God, do something in them. Convict them. Chasten them. And nothing seems to be happening. Sometimes it comes across, now, will you go and tell them? No, I will not. I don't have a dog in that fight. I'm not going to play your games. But inevitably, if we're not getting the results that we like, it will sometimes evolve into us going to that person and saying, you know what you're doing is wrong. You know what the Bible says about it? You know what the Bible says about how you're acting, how you're treating me? In other words, God, you tell them that they need to be more like me. God, you tell them that their priorities, their actions, their thoughts, their behaviors need to line up more closely with mine. Then everything will be okay. See, Jesus doesn't fall for that. He doesn't play those kind of games. Never has, never will. In fact, this is what's great about Him. Again, He comes to the rescue. When He sees this taking place, again, He gives no time and no attention to the expression of the frustration, how it's being acted out. He goes beneath the surface to the root issue. And He says to Martha, He says to us, listen, the reason you're so upset and the reason you're trying to back me into a corner, demand of me to do a certain thing, you're too worried about things. You got too much on your plate that you're concerned about when there's only one thing that you really need to be concerned about. And that's the way some of your translations may read. Martha, you're concerned about too many things. See, sometimes we'll disguise our worry with concern. I'm just concerned about them. So they need to transform and change and be like me. Jesus says, no, we're not going to do it that way. What you need to be concerned about is one thing: your relationship with me. Now, it's important to know, Jesus is not comparing Mary and Martha. He's not telling Martha, you need to be more like your sister. She's the one brought the issue to the forefront. He's simply using the situation, to draw her attention and her focus back where it should be, on Him. You're worried, you're upset about too many things. And this is simply you acting out. And so with everybody who raised their hand, earlier this morning, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that there's probably quite a few of us in here who feel less like Mary and a lot like Martha. We're not really relaxed. We're not at ease, but we're driven about, dragged down, overwhelmed, pulled apart. And if Jesus were standing right here, He would say, call your name, my name, say, listen, you worried and upset about too many things. You're concerned about too much, and there's only one thing that you really need to concentrate on. There's only one thing that needs to concern you today. And so, with the little bit of time we got left, let me give you these three things, these three concerns, as I'm calling them, that will keep us calm. See, worry is going to drive you crazy. Worry is just going to drive you to the end of your sanity limit, right? But there's three concerns that can keep us calm, three truths. When we feel that worry, we feel that uneasiness, that frustration, that fear, whatever it is, begin to attack us, come on strong, we need to meet it with these truths. One, Jesus never leaves us alone or without help. We always need to keep that in front of us. Jesus never leaves us alone or without help. See, that's where Martha began to lose her way. She said, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me? She's left me to do all the work by myself. Tell her to help me. I feel alone and I don't have any help. Jesus rebukes that. He challenges that. If you would just not allow yourself to become so distracted, doubtful, angry, all of these things, you would realize that I'm not only here for her, but I'm here for you. You're not by yourself. But you've chosen to go your own way and chase your own tail. Jesus never leaves us alone or without help. This is a good scripture here to memorize in this kind of time. Psalm 46, verse 1 through 3, it says, God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present, that means all the time, day or night, an ever-present help in trouble. When there's issues, when there's problems, when there's worries. Therefore, in light of that, because God is always there to help us, therefore we will not fear. We're not going to be worried. We're not going to be overwhelmed with anxiety. Though the earth gives way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with surging. It doesn't matter if the whole world falls apart. There's no need for us to get all worried about it because He's always there. Jesus never leaves us alone or without help. He told His disciples, who obviously, after following Him everywhere for 3.5 years, were a little bit concerned when He started talking about leaving. They're worried. And He says to them in John 14, verse 18, I will not leave you as orphans. And we do a lot of ministry here in our church to orphans. In Haiti, we do ministry to kids here locally who are in need of foster care. Just imagine a child who feels like he or she's been left alone and has nobody in the world to help them. Somebody who can't necessarily help themselves, do for themselves. Jesus says, I'm not going to leave you like that. I'm not going to leave you as orphans. I will come to you. I'm always going to be there, and I'm going to be there to help no matter what happens in your life. Another truth that we need to concentrate on, we need to let really concern us, is that Jesus' grace, it's always sufficient for any and everything we face. It reminds me of the Apostle Paul. In 2 Corinthians 9, verse 8, he says, God is able to bless you abundantly. Why is He able to bless those who don't deserve His blessing? Because He's gracious. All right? God is able to bless because He's gracious. He's able to bless you abundantly so that, listen to all the alls here, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound, you will succeed, and be victorious in every good work. Now keep in mind that this comes from a guy who knows what he's talking about. Paul had some real serious issues, some battles in his life. He talks about in 2 Corinthians 12, that thorn in the flesh. He called it a messenger of Satan. Like this issue, whatever it was, whether it was mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual, he says, this thorn, this problem is straight from hell. Like this is Satan incarnate. And he begs God, please take it away from me. Why? Because it had him worried. He was worried that whatever that was going to keep him from being and doing everything that he felt God had created him to be and do. This is going to become an obstacle. This is going to become a hindrance, a roadblock. And so he says, God, take this away. God, Lord, don't you care? Won't you do something about this? You know what God said? That most famous verse, 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is sufficient. My grace is enough. My grace is all you need, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul, just trust me. I'll get you through it. Don't worry about it. The third thing, Keep in front of us at all times this truth. Jesus provides inner peace, a calming peace and strength for whatever comes our way. He said there in John 14:27, he says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives." Think about this for a second. How does the world give? The world gives partially, incompletely. The world gives with conditions. The world gives and then takes back. The world gives with expectations. And it could just go on and on and on. Jesus says, I don't do that. I'm going to give you peace, my peace. What greater peace could there be? I'm going to give you my peace, and I'm not going to give like the world gives. So don't let your heart be troubled, and don't be afraid. He could have easily said, don't be worried and don't get anxious, because all of these are rooted in fear. Because every step of the way, moment by moment, I will provide peace for anything and everything you face. It just made me realize and think back to my younger days in church and singing probably one of the most famous hymns that Bill Gaither ever wrote, "Because He Lives." Y'all remember that one? Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Because He lives, all fear, all worry, all anxiety, it's all gone. Because I know He holds the future. And I love this line. And life is worth living just because He lives. There's no reason to fret. There's no reason to be worried. There's no reason to get angry, to get frustrated, to be overwhelmed with anxiety, because as long as we have Jesus, He says, I'll never leave you alone. You're never going to be without help. Anything and everything you face, I will always have the grace, the peace, and the strength to give you the ability to not only endure it, but to overcome it. You see, we only get one chance at life, right? We all know that. You only get one round. And it's worth living. Like truly living. And as Corrie ten Boom said, she's a famous missionary, she said, worry doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrows. It empties today of its strength. It's just not worth it. Peter said, cast all your cares, all your anxiety over onto Him, because He cares for you. Jesus loves us too much to allow us to take one more step carrying a load that was never ours to begin with. He says, give it to me. Last week I shared with you that we, like I said, put our house up for sale. We went to vacation. Within 14 days, it was under contract. My realtor called. She said, are you sitting down? I said, no, I stood up to talk to you because I figured you had some good news. She said, yeah. She said, we have a cash offer. And it was within reason for us to accept. She said, I think you need to take it. I was like, do the paperwork. Let's do it. She said, well, you need to spend maybe a day or two to pray about it. I said, no, don't need to pray about this. Done prayed about it. This is good. Let's go, right? And so everything was great. All of that stress, all of that worry, right, that I had accumulated and taken to the beach with me and then brought back home, it was gone. Hey, we're under contract. This thing's good. We can move on to the next thing. I laid that burden down, walked away from it. I thought, man, this is great. Everything's falling in line just like it needs to be. I shared with y'all last Sunday about all of that, encouraging you. Hey, believe God for your own situation. And I still believe that. Monday morning, I got a call. The buyers backed out. They canceled the contract. I went back and I picked up that worry. Because now I got to start over. Back to square one. We've gone all week this week. Not a call, not a showing. Our other house is under construction. It's getting closer and closer and closer. I'm thinking, we got to get rid of this thing. We got to get out of here. We need that money to go toward the next one and all these things. And so I picked up that worry, and when you first grab hold of it, it doesn't seem like a lot. Whatever, it could be a house, it could be a relationship, it could be finances, it could be sickness, whatever it is. When you first pick that worry up, it's not all that much. It's not that difficult to carry it around. I mean, juggle it, yeah. Hey, it's no big deal. I got this. But as time goes on, it becomes a problem. What was small, light, not very cumbersome, after a few hours, a few days and weeks, for some of you, years and years and years and years, it's become pretty heavy. It's almost as if that worry has become a part of you. And you're not really sure how to live without it. Oh, sure, it's odd. It's a little weird because other people have begun to notice too. Because everywhere you go, it's with you. You go to work with it. You do your job. You eat. You never let it go. Even when you go home, you go on vacation, you take it and you bring it back. You're out having a great day, a nice day on the lake, right there with you. And when you go to bed and you try to rest, you got to hang on to that. Hang on to it. So that when you wake up, it's right there. It's right there. And it's getting heavier and heavier and heavier. Jesus says, it's about time to let that go. Cast all of your worries, your anxieties over onto me because I care for you. It was never meant for you. You're not equipped to carry that. It's time to let go. Monday, I picked that thing back up. And all week, I've been walking around with this. It's been on my mind. Even when everybody else thinks that everything's great, when I'm trying to enjoy time with my family, it's right there. And I can tell you that what I'm saying this morning is true because this week, if you don't believe me, ask Jessica. I felt like I've been irritable, impatient, just wondering, is everything going to work out like I think it should? And God reminded me, that's not for you to worry about. You are concerned and upset and worried about too many things. And only one thing is important. So drop it. The thing about that is, when you're met with that truth and you do what He says and you drop it, you immediately feel lighter. You feel a release. Oh man, it feels so good. The temptation is to go back and take it home with you. I want to challenge you this morning. We don't do this a lot. But I was telling Jaron backstage, I said, sometimes certain truths, certain messages really lend themselves to an immediate and even physical response. Something that we can remember, something that's tangible. And last night, as I was thinking about this, I thought, I need a rock for every single person in church. That could have been done. But then it occurred to me, no, they'll bring their own. They'll bring their own. And so, as they begin to play for us, I want to give you the opportunity. I just gave you the example. I want to give you the opportunity to do the very same thing. I said, sometimes we just need that physical act of doing something that we can later on look back and refer back to and say, no, it was done. It's over. I let that go, and I'm not going back there. I'm not carrying that. I'm not picking that up again. And so these guys are going to play for us, and just like in the first service, I'm going to invite you guys, if you want to come forward, then you make your way and you do that, okay? Maybe you don't. Maybe you'll stay right there where you are, and that's fine. Like I said, sometimes I just need to do something tangible, memorable, so that it is seared in my brain that that's over, and I'm going to turn that page now and move on to something better. Like I said, I didn't bring a rock for everybody, but if you need to go so far as to pick mine up and drop it, you go right ahead. If that helps you, you do that. You may just want to come up and just lay your hand down on this stage, pray and walk away. I left it there. Maybe you want to spend some time in prayer. Maybe you want me to pray with you. Listen, I'll be glad to do whatever you need. We're not going to rush this. I know you guys, some of you who get here a few minutes early, y'all are standing out in the foyer, and I come out. I love you seeing you stand there, but I told you, God was doing something. We ain't going to rush Him. So, it's 11:32. We're already about 10, 15 minutes over. But we ain't going to rush things. Listen, if you got somewhere to be and this ain't important for you, leave. Sorry, that sounded rude. Sorry. But listen, when the Spirit of God moves and He's dealing with people, just let Him do His thing. Because next time it might be you. Let Him do His thing. So let's all stand, and if you feel led to take action, then you go ahead and do that.